All right. Well, I just wanted to introduce myself. So my name is Matt Henchen, and I teach Civics at Harwood Union High School. I'll show you where that is so you can get an idea in a minute, but I want to let the students and my administrator, who's leaving right now, introduce themselves. So, go ahead.
I'm Cole Boy. I'm a junior at Harwood, and I was in Mr. Hench's Civics class last year, sophomore year.
My name is Haley Hammond. I'm a sophomore at Harwood, and I'm in CSC right now.
Hi, I'm Mallory Wright. I was in CSC last year, and I'm a junior.
Hi, my name is Emma Jean. I took CSC last year as a sophomore and I'm currently a junior at Harwood Union High School.
I'm Omar Batah. I took CSC last year also, and I'm a junior, and I'm Mr. Henchen's student assistant this year.
And I'm Amy Rex. I'm one of the co-principals of Harwood Union High School, and really honored and thrilled to be here with our students and Mr. Henchen doing the amazing work that they are doing around voice and choice.
So as I said before, Central Vermont. So you can see Montpelier. If you know where Montpelier is, you know where Vermont is. We're about 20 minutes from Montpelier. It's a moderate-sized school as far as Vermont goes, which means we graduate about 105, 110 students per class. So 450 maybe 9 through 12. And the goals for today, we were really excited to come to a conference with so many people, and we present at the next workshop as well, and we're hoping to get more people. I mean, this is really sort of mission driven, so if you enjoyed the presentation, make sure to talk to people in the brief intermission and have them come, because the more the merrier. We really believe in really strongly in what we're doing, which is to encourage the teaching of what we're calling political literacy in New England schools. So how many of you guys, by show of hands, have ever used the term political literacy? 3, 4-ish. Good. That's kind of what I expected. So we're trying to sort of bring that back into the discourse in our schools. What is political literacy? And in a nutshell, it's basically teaching the students the knowledge, skills, and dispositions they need to be active and engaged citizens. They don't all have to be experts in political philosophy and that sort of stuff, but they need to know the basics. So when they get out, they can be active and engaged citizens. And that's what we're trying to encourage. We're also trying to encourage, if there's one strategy we're going to talk a lot about, it's encouraging the practice of making your classroom transparent and bringing students into the process. And I know I'm kind of preaching to the choir for many of you guys, but really that's been the biggest impact for me, is when I started really treating my students as partners as partners rather than just as sort of subjects. And of course, that didn't happen until I started focusing more on students and student learning and less on the curriculum. The third thing is then also to explain how proficiency-based learning and personalized learning strategies has actually allowed us to do this work. We really could not do the work we're trying to do without these strategies. We're going to illustrate the need for political literacy. We're going to share some strategies and some evidence of the strategies in action. And then we're going to share some student perspectives on the strategies. Consider scalability to other schools, and talk about next steps. And then we'll have a 15-minute Q&A. And I'm going to try to rush a little because I really want to get to these guys. But quickly, we're going to do a quick poll. So we're going to show you a series of pictures, and we'd like each one of you guys just, you can write it down on a piece of paper if you know, but really we just want to have one person at your table report out the results of the poll. Okay, how many people got the answer correct? Okay, and we're going to do an informal poll. So then we're just going to ask the room. We're going to start here. We're going to go around the room. We're going to go down and back up and then back down. And somebody at your table needs to tell us how many were correct. Okay, so just yell 3, 4, 2. Okay? So, the first person, and don't say it out loud if you know it. Chat amongst yourselves, identify somebody at your table that's going to report out. Haley, can you count the number? Okay, so we're going to start with this table. How many? 4. 6,
5.
5.
All of us.
And what number is that?
10.
10. 6. 2. 3. 6. In the back?
4.
4. Okay, next person. Don't say it out loud.
I'm glad to hear it.
All right, so we're going to count this table. 7, 6, 8,
5.
5.
9.
5, 9, 6, 2, 2, 6,
4.
4. Okay. Next person.
This is definitely the trick. Oh, no.
Come on.
There's no name, just the sign.
Okay, we're gonna call this one 0. 0. 0.
0.
0.
Oh, I didn't know.
0.
0.
0. 0.
0.
0.
Yeah.
0.
Yeah.
0.
I'm not sure.
You're not sure? We'll come back to you. 0. Who do you think it might be?
Scott Walker?
No. But thank you for a guess. This is a random dude. I literally Google searched random dude, and this is one of the results that came up. In fact, his name is Bruce Weinstein. He's known as the ethics guy, and I just thought maybe somebody would actually recognize him, but they don't. But that was done for a reason. Okay, the last person. Don't say anything.
The pride of strength.
Wiley. It's okay if you don't know, yes. It's perfectly okay if you don't know. Let's get a number though. So 7.
4.
4. And you have to know for sure, be honest. 4. 4. In the back.
5.
5. 5. 2. We'll go back there. 4. 4.
So we're at 5.
5. And 2. So what's the poll? Let's tabulate that quickly. What did we get for Beyonce? Do we have that up yet? Calculator. What's not calculator?
Beyonce for president.
So this is, who knows who this is? Not Bill Clinton. Joe Biden, right? And his job? Vice President. Good. So you guys did much better than most of my students, unfortunately, at the beginning of the year. We had about a 10% rate, and I think perhaps this class or this group of people is maybe a little bit more politically literate than your average American. In fact, we'll come back to the results in a minute.
Joe
but
Biden is. So as an
just a little-
experiment, we sent a camera crew out on Hollywood Boulevard, and I think you know where this is headed. And once they got there, we had them ask, we specifically picked Americans. We asked Americans a very simple question, and that question was, who is Joe Biden? Okay? And here's how that went.
Who is Joe Biden? I have no idea. Do you want to take a guess? A man. Joe Biden. Wasn't he our governor? I think he's the governor or something.
Joe Biden, I don't know, terrorist.
Who is Joe Biden?
No comment.
Who is Joe Biden?
Congressman?
Congressman of where?
I don't know.
Take a guess.
Washington, D.C.
Who is Joe Biden?
Who's Joe Biden? I have no idea.
Do you know who our vice president is?
No, I don't.
You want to take a guess?
Condoleezza Rice.
First female black vice president. Joe Biden is a senator. How do you know that he's a senator? From references and from news and casually reading newspapers or coming across things on the internet.
Joe Biden, is he a movie star?
I don't know. The guy Joe Biden, he is a Republican and he's going to be president soon, I'm assuming.
Do you think he's someone who would be a friend of Obama's?
No, he looks like he probably wouldn't oppose.
How come?
I'm basically going off skin color right now. He's not supporting the Democratic Party or whatever like that. So.
He's coming to the talent day or something like that, right?
Yes.
He's like the assistant president or something like
that. So, you know, I don't think many of you guys are really surprised by that. You know, when Jimmy Kimmel said we're going to go out in the street, there was a collective chuckle like, oh, here we go again, you know, to look at how much Americans don't know about politics. And I was the same way, but it wasn't until a little bit later that I started realizing that it was really, really a problem. I had a moment of clarity that I'm going to talk about later. But through the research, these are some statistics, and they're pretty startling. So the average gap between, well, first of all, the average gap between U.S. voting rates in America and Western Europe is 20 to 30%. We vote 20-30% less than average Americans. I think most of you guys know that. That's a shocking number. And then the average gap between youth voting rates and adults is another 20 to 30%, 28%. Youth do not vote, especially at midterm elections. They'll come out for the president because he's a celebrity, but at midterms, youth voting rates plummet. Overall voting rates since 18-year-olds could vote have actually been in decline, pretty steady decline. There was a big blip in 2008 and 2014 because of the Obama presidency, but basically, other than that, there's been a decline. And the most shocking thing for me was finding out that in a poll conducted by Circle, which is a civic youth organization, they found that only 9% of American youth felt that voting was their civic duty. They're right, for sure. It's their right to vote, but their duty, their obligation, their responsibility, 9%. Pretty shocking statistics. And you know, if the world was perfect, that wouldn't be a big deal, right? Maybe they're just not voting because they're totally fine. In fact, I have students tell me every year, you know, we work on community action projects, and I say, well, what bothers you about the community? What can you change? And I have many students that will look at me straight face and say, I think there's nothing I would change. I'm very happy. There's really nothing going on. And that's difficult to respond to, especially when you know and you're aware of all of those things going on. In fact, in the Gallup poll here, the most recent Gallup poll, that's a list of the problems that America faces. And what's very interesting to me, and I'll let you guys chew on this over dinner later, is the number one thing that Americans identified was actually government. The biggest political issue, the biggest issue we face was government. And you know, that we could have long conversations about why that is. But it's a big deal. We need to start shifting students' perspectives from me to we, and we know that at the age of these guys, they're definitely focused on me. We all were when we were that age. It's part of our development. But to help them start to think about we, because in this nation that's so individualistic, the solutions to some of these problems are not going to come through one person or one individual. They're going to come through collective action. So my personal moment of clarity came about 4 or 5 years ago. I was teaching a course called History on Film, and that used to be sort of the slacker course, right? When I first started teaching it, it was the class for kids that didn't do well in traditional history classes, and I was told, well, the kids just watch a bunch of movies and then they make posters. And I said, all right, well, to some degree that was liberating. Nobody was looking over your shoulder. You can kind of do whatever you want to do. But I had started shifting that class to be a little more academic. However, I actually tried the poster thing, and I also found for the first time that when I wasn't driving what kids had to learn from a particular film, and I really let them come to that, it was actually pretty cool what they would do and what they would talk about in the posters. Maybe not the posters, but the presentations and the dialogue and the discussion that emerged after. But the one thing I did do is I started shifting it towards present-day problems. I'm sure a lot of you guys have read Howard Zinn and been influenced and read his book, personally, you know, he's a lackluster historian. I mean, we all know he has extremely biased. There's lots of issues with him as a historian, but he also wrote a book that I would highly recommend to anybody. It's called The Politics of History. And in that book, he talks about the fact that we have our students, and he's particularly talking about university education, but I bring it down to high school education too. And he says we have our students for a very precious, small amount of time. And the social studies has a meaning, has a purpose. And we should be focusing our instruction on some of the biggest problems that are facing the world. He called it presentism, studying about present day issues. And then using history as a tool to help understand that. Okay, not viewing history as the end, but as a means to an end. And that's always really struck with me. So in History on Film, we basically shifted to documentaries, and we're dealing with modern day issues. We watched Sicko. We read a couple of reviews of Sicko, some negative reviews of Sicko, the Michael Moore film that was done a few years ago. And then we watched this Frontline documentary that looked at different healthcare systems around the world. And it made a special note that, you know, every healthcare system has problems, but we are the only wealthy industrialized nation that doesn't actually have a system. And there are 50 million people uninsured. And at the end of this unit, one of the kids in the back said, "So what are we going to do about it?" And I said, "Great question. That's what I've been waiting for. What are you going to do about it?" And I asked them, "What are you going to do?" And they sat there quietly, still, no ideas. And I said, "Listen, the bell's going to ring pretty soon. I want to see 2 hands." So 2 hands spring up immediately. I asked the first guy. I was actually surprised he raised his hand. But I asked because he's not really very communicative. But I asked him, and he said, "Well, you know," I said, "What do you think?" He said, "Well, I have no idea." I said, "Well, you raised your hand." He said, "Yeah, because you said you wouldn't let us leave until people raise their hands." So I said, "All right, let's get a real response." So the only other student said, "Well, the only thing you can do is get a good job. If you don't get a good job, you're not going to get health care. That's it." So then I said, "Well, you know, how about, like, you know, putting pressure on politicians to actually create a universal healthcare system or some sort of healthcare system or improving the healthcare system?" And the barrage of negative criticism I received was shocking to me. I mean, it was like, it was unbelievable. Politics don't matter. All politicians are crooks. They're all corrupt. Nobody listens to you. There's nothing you can do about it. We're never going to have that. Not in America. I mean, it went on and on and on. And I kind of, the bell rang and they left, and I was sitting there like, holy crap. Like, I'm teaching a curriculum of cynicism and disengagement. And here I am thinking I'm going to expose these guys to these problems, multiple perspectives, and it's actually going to lead to some change. But all it did is make most of those students more depressed and more disengaged and more cynical than they were when they came in the beginning of the year. And I was pretty bummed. I had like 2 weeks left with these guys, and I felt like a complete failure. So then, to make matters worse,
in the run-up to the...
To make matters worse, I went home. My wife and I went to pick up the kids, and we picked up my 7-year-old and 4-year-old, and we were driving home, and it was during the Vermont governor's election. And Brian Doobie versus Republican Brian Doobie versus Democrat Peter Shumlin. And just really more for comic relief to make myself feel better, I asked my kids, I said, "Who do you think I should vote for?" And my wife videotaped it with the phone, because they always just say silly stuff. And what he ended up saying actually just completely broke my heart. And I ended up going back to, I was studying for my master's degree research. I had already done two research, I don't know what you call it when you prepare for the research preparations. And I went back and I said, "I got to cancel the second one, sorry, I have to change everything." And luckily, James Nagel at St. Mike's University says, "Totally, that's great, awesome, let's do it." And it became this question of what can schools do to engage our youth politically. So this is what happened.
Most recent Vermont governor's race, I asked my 7-year-old son who he thought I should vote for, Brian Doobie or Peter Shumlin. This is how he responded.
Well, Brian Doobie doesn't know about healthcare, and he might kill at least one baby. And Peter Shumlin voted 4 times for us to pay at least $1 trillion a month.
And where did he get all of that useful information? I asked.
I watched it on TV.
Oh. Actually, that does sound kind of familiar.
Last year, Shumlin led the effort to raise over $20 million in taxes on the working families of Vermont.
Healthcare costs for Vermonters are rising $1 million a day. Families and businesses are struggling, and there is a direct line between skyrocketing costs to single-payer system.
So after being so well informed by TV, how does he feel about voting?
So who do you think I should vote for?
I don't even think you should vote.
And there you have it, the wonderful effects of negative political ads.
So as you can imagine, I had a lot to think about that night as I went to grad school. I'm like, holy crap, what are we doing? Like, that's what kids, when we don't teach this, that's what they get. And that's the reality, because they're not really getting it at home, and if they are, they're getting generally one perspective. And they're not getting it in church or civic institutions, because those don't exist that much anymore. They're certainly not getting it from politicians and all of their ad campaigns. Politicians serve to confuse, and they're not getting it from the media. Where are they getting it? And that's what's going to end up happening if we don't do something about it. So I went back, did some research, did a lot of research actually, asked the big question, what can we do? And we ended up creating this little video. That was for a master's thesis, but I'm going to skip that. I did a bunch of traditional research, and I saw all the rock the vote, all these sorts of things, and basically what I came to the conclusion of is that anything that they had already said was just simply not enough. Civics education, the way the rock the vote campaigns, getting the youth vote, that just wasn't enough. They were not dealing with the real problem, which is that kids don't know about politics. They have no desire. They have no motivation. So all of this stuff, like it's too boring, or let's see, too busy. You know, young people are too busy. Registration problems, don't like the candidates, not interested, felt my vote wouldn't count. A lot of these things are really not the problem. They're the symptoms, I think, of the problem. And the more I talked to students, I said, really, come on, like, what is it? Like, why? So we came up with a few things. We identified that students have a poor understanding of the U.S. government and the U.S. political system. And, you know, Churchill said democracy is the worst form of government except all else. And I tell kids that sometimes when you look at our system and you get frustrated that things aren't changing, what you need to understand is that that's how the system was designed. It's not necessarily a sign that the system is so hopelessly flawed. Sometimes that's how it was designed. And when you have an understanding of the political system, you have more patience with things. Poor understanding of political, economic, and moral philosophy. Poor understanding of contemporary political issues. Lack of confidence in their personal beliefs and inability to create a clear point of view. So the most important thing was that last one. We found that students that were able to have confidence in their political point of view on one issue dramatically increased their political engagement. Shifting from an I can't mentality to an I can mentality. We talk a lot about growth mindset, so we need to talk about, you know, confidence mindset, having confidence in our abilities, and that only comes through really in-depth analysis and knowing your stuff. So, lots of strategies, and I'm going to sort of go a little fast here, but really, this is what we need to be doing. You know, the path to democracy is rocky, it's long, and our schools really need to be not making it worse or not doing anything, not just standing there and being like, yeah, damn, there's a lot of boulders there. We need to start moving some of that stuff away so that students can get there, so that we can actually get to the democracy that we should have. So what I did in relation to PBL is I sat there and I thought, all right, well, what are the skills required for active citizenship? Students need to be self-directed, they need to communicate, they need to have critical literacy, be able to collaborate, creative and practical problem solving. And these are all done the year before the transferable skills came out in Vermont, or what some of you guys might call cross-curricular skills. And guess what? They're all the same, because any adult that sits and thinks about what kids need in the society comes up with the same list of skills. So then we take the skills and we say, how are we going to teach it? We break it down. So in this case, critical literacy, what does it mean? So we broke it down. Students need to be able to locate resources. And that may seem like, oh, of course, duh. And in so many classes, we expect them just to know that. But if they're going to be critical, if they're going to know about a political issue, we expect them to research and get multiple sources. But it's not about having three things. It's about having three sources that are different, right? So that there's a piece of the truth in every source, and you search and you research and you research and you try to find that. But how are kids going to do that when they don't know any differences? They don't know any bias. They can't tell you the difference between a liberal or conservative or a neocon or anything like that. So to be able to locate resources is actually an extremely tough skill to teach and assess. Because they need to know political ideologies. They need to know bias. We need to teach them that stuff. We can't assume it. They then need to be able to analyze the resource. and then evaluate it, and then synthesize it into their own educated opinion. So we take analysis. I can identify the main arguments. I can identify facts from opinion. And by the way, there's the big question of bias, which we're going to talk about. Well, what if your teacher's a crazy right-winger or a left-winger? Aren't they going to be brainwashed? And that's a legitimate concern. But one way around that is that students are analyzing resources. It's not their opinion. It's not the teacher's opinion. What they're being asked to do is identify the arguments of somebody else. And it's either right or wrong, for the most part. It's a little subjective here and there, but generally it's either right or wrong. So we take these and we create the task. So description of the task. It says description of the task. About the author, identify the author's bias. Identify the author's main claims, and then circle and mark up the text and engage. And we model that. And through that work, we get better at analyzing the argument. The next step is to basically evaluate them. So say once you really know the arguments or the arguments of the author, you evaluate, you do some research. Some students, this is another option to do actually an argument map, and we've got some links, and in the conference materials there'll be a link to my blog with all this material. So this is an example of a map, and in the map they had to identify what the task was. What is the main argument of the overall resource, which is very difficult. And the way we do that first is we identify all the arguments, and then we take all of them into consideration and say, now what is the author really saying? And you get a really great map. And then we can actually start evaluating. So we can take a claim and say, is that true? How many of you guys have ever seen the video Story of Stuff? Annie Leonard. It's about how much we consume and that sort of stuff. Well, we followed that up with a chapter from Kyle Olson's book called Useful Idiots, How Americans Are Subverting American Exceptionalism, or how useful idiots are subverting American exceptionalism in our schools. And he argues basically that she's a socialist trying to brainwash kids. And so we look at that, and he says, look, she was wrong about military spending. And we looked at that, and we said, was she wrong? And we actually found out that, yeah, she was wrong. And we talked about what that does to your argument and what that does to your overall point of view. So that's the argument map. So that's another, well, just up under that. That's another prettier look. These guys wanted to make it look a little bit different. We provided a template on Prezi. So we're going to shift into having these guys talk about their experiences. But before we do that, we want to, I'm going to talk about two specific strategies. One is deliberative dialogue, critical thinking, using subjective biased resources in the classroom rather than trying to find the objective resource. So deliberative dialogue and critical thinking. The second one is going to be the use of personalized assignments or personalized projects, personalized community action projects. And they're going to have a chance to talk to you about what impact those projects have had on them. But first, briefly, we want to let you guys participate in the dialogue. So at your tables for just 2 minutes, a 2-minute dialogue, we're just going to call probably 2 or 3 random tables, and we're going to take a vote. So at the end of your 2-minute deliberation, take a vote. Should 16-year-olds be allowed to vote? And there's some pros and cons there to give you some understanding, but basically it's free dialogue at your table. So again, your goal in 2 minutes is to come up with a vote, and we're going to do around the room again and just see what you think. So should 16-year-olds be allowed to vote?
I think so. I think drive a car. I guess I feel still we're not exactly. That's what I was just, and a lot of it if you want to post your doing it, and I have a younger age by the time that I need to, that I'm done waiting. But at the same time, 14 then, like is it a place up for? I don't think so. But I would never.
I think
There's nothing
many adults.
Obviously, we can't allow it to
For me, it's just like a lot of
there was a movement to allow it didn't pass. I had a chance to hear about it. The most important was that 16-year-olds would just be encouraged by their parents and controlled by their parents.
But I don't think someone
I don't feel like they
no, it should be so I think it should be
because of what their peers say or who doesn't pay attention to the art that's going on. I didn't personally find that. I think that I know a lot of
Something like that. Just get back to their room.
It's not bad that I said that.
All right, get the final tally. No, I definitely want.
You're absolutely right.
Or their friends.
All right, so we're going to start here. So we're just going to go with yes votes and assume the rest are no, just to make it easy. So we're just going to go with yes votes, if any. This table? 7 yes?
What do we say?
Interesting.
6 yes.
6?
You say no, you say no, I say yes. 3
Table
yes,
in the
2
back?
no. 3 yes, 2 no.
3? In
Oh,
the
yes,
back?
no.
7 yes.
7.
Yeah.
The middle table?
6 yes.
6? 1?
I think we're 2 no and 2 undecided.
Okay. Yeah, I sort of biased the pool there with yeses.
0 yes.
0 yes.
0.
0 yes. Good for you. Good for you. Haley's probably not excited. That was her project, but so what did we get? What's the number?
18.
18. So what I would do here is, we teach that communication, dialogue, use of biased resources, and that sort of stuff. So it's a pretty complicated task, but we have to teach dialogue. We can't just have kids have discussion. We have to actively teach dialogue. So dialogue is basically, it's not where you try to make your idea smarter than everyone else's or better than everyone else's. It's where everybody there is trying to get to the truth. You're trying to build consensus, and even though you may never reach there, you're deliberating. You're having that dialogue. It goes back to Aristotle, who said that no one person was wise by themselves. It required a large group of people, actively listening to each other to get close to the truth. We talk all the time about how there's truth. There's truth in every perspective. As outlandish as some may be, if there was no truth or no grain of truth in any of them, then it wouldn't be an idea. It would just be patently discarded. So where's the element of truth and how to start with that? So these are things we need to teach. And we do these over and over and over again. And hopefully we get better and better and better, or at least that's the idea. So we have students reflect on their participation. So I'd ask questions of you. What role did you take? Did you actively listen? Did you monopolize the conversation? Were you quiet and not say anything? Did you not participate at all? And then we would set personal goals. The next time you do a dialogue, what will you do? So we're, again, trying to really encourage that growth mindset.
Excuse me.
Yeah.
What's your opinion on the voting age for 16?
This gets into should I give my opinion in class?
I'm
since you guys have already given me your opinion,
yeah.
I absolutely 100% believe in it. Yeah.
How long have you been teaching at Harwood?
9 years.
Would you have said that 9 years ago?
No way.
When was the transformation?
Student voice and listening to students, and realizing that these guys are just as smart and just as able to think critically about current issues as most adults. In fact, better than many adults that I work with, many lawyers and doctors, and and quite honestly, it's very sad because when issues like this come up, like when Brattleboro had considered it, the comments from the community that these guys hear and read about how kids should be treated in school are really, really, really sad, really disheartening. Actually, last year we had a security camera issue. Should we have security cameras? And these guys, I showed them some of the comments, and one of the projects was, well, let's get back and respond. Let's split it with youth voice. So yeah. So we're gonna have Emma and Mallory and Cole just talk about their experiences and what what impact that's had on them. Emma?
Okay. So I'm going to be talking about a few things mostly focused on CSC and what I got out of it, and the class that Mr. Henchen teaches is called Creating Sustainable Communities, so if we refer to it as CSC, that's what we're talking about. But first, what I got out of CSC was a belief that we all share, that political literacy needs to be taught in schools. And not only does it create a youth that's more engaged in politics and open-minded and critical thinkers, and it doesn't only help you when you're talking about politics and when those issues arise, but I found that it's helped me in most of all of the other classes that I took. So I'm going to share a story with you about how CSC, which is a class I took last year, has helped me in classes that I take this year. So this year I'm a junior and I take a course called American Studies, which is a course that most juniors take. And in American Studies we do a lot of dialogue, we do a lot of talk about controversial issues. And so recently we had something that we call a body poll, and the statement was about federal welfare. We're learning about the Depression, so we're kind of talking about those programs. And so you have people who disagree on one side and people who agree on one side. And so the more conservative classmates went to disagree, and I'm from Vermont, pretty liberal, kind of across the board, that's a thing. So of course I was on agree. And the conservative arguments were, it makes people lazy. People are leeching off the system. They find loopholes, and it makes them not want to progress in their lives because they're happy with just feeding off the bottom. And knowing people that are on food stamps and government assistance, I didn't agree. I said, if people come home from working minimum wage jobs, they can't send their kids to bed with other kids being hungry. They don't have any help. It creates hopelessness, and that's what I believe creates a system of poverty, the systematic poverty that we see oftentimes in the United States. So as kids on the other side were yelling about this, immediately what I wanted to do was tell them that they were wrong. And then Mr. Henchen, I can't get him off my shoulder ever since taking CSC, and he just comes down, and I think open-mindedness, what's an effective argument? I need to evaluate both sides. What can I do to make my argument most effective? And so I can tell they're upset about people who are taking advantage of the system. So I raise my hand, and as I'm talking about how the government helps people and how people need it, how people rely on it, and if we don't have it, it will create a system of poverty which is just more widespread, and it will create hopelessness. Like, there was a kid on the other side of the room, and he immediately interrupted me and was like, what about the people who are taking our hard-earned tax dollars? And I said, I remember to keep on writing this, I said, yes, we do need to reform the system because people find loopholes. People do take advantage of it. There needs to be more reform, there needs to be more regulation. And immediately he was going to come back at me with an argument. And then he stopped and was like, wait, she agreed with me. And you could see that more conservative classmates, their minds were turning. So we talk a lot about in CSC the effectiveness of your argument, and how if you're going to come back at people, you're not going to evaluate your source, you're not going to know both sides. It often creates what we see in politics, is just like the bantering. And that creates a hopelessness, and that's what, for American youth, what I thought before I went to CSC is it's just people arguing about agendas, about what they believe. And I think a common thought before you go into CSC is, if you're a Democrat, then you're a Democrat on all issues. And we go in and we say, we evaluate the issues, and you can be a Democrat on some issues, you can be a Republican on some issues. And I think the source of identity and stepping back from it and looking at it with kind of an unbiased thing is a skill that CSC has instilled in me, and I think a lot of other people, and is like a great thing. It's something that I appreciate. So,
I would say CSC has formed me more as a person than any other class I've ever taken. And I think I can speak with Mr. Henchen, is we disagree on pretty much everything. But I've learned, when I first started the class, there was another boy in the class, and for a while it was just Mallory versus Corey. We'll scream at each other, everyone else will watch, and it wasn't very productive. But I learned that, like, you need to really step back and understand everyone's perspective, like Emma was saying. And that's a skill that I've used in all my other classes. And I kind of learned how to listen, and I know that sounds stupid because, you know, you listen for your whole life, but you really don't, especially when you're angry. So when you bring up an argument and you have your opinion, or the opinion you're supposed to have, and you get angry, you don't listen. So you need to learn how to do both, and that's the thing I learned in Mr. Henchen's class. And then, like, another point that I had was, every day I sit in class and say, well, how's this going to help me in life? I said, in math, never going to use this again. The science, oh yeah, the periodic table's really going to come in handy. But no, CSE could not be more relevant. Politics affect everyone, and I think it's sad when people say politics don't affect them, because it does. And everyone in America, and I think the CSE has taught everyone in our class that it is something to be appreciated, because a lot of people don't appreciate it, and a lot of people don't get the rights that we have in America. And I think that's a big message that I took away from CSE.
So going back to one of the poll questions, should 16-year-olds be able to vote? I say absolutely. And then, also as we're here at an education conference, I'm sure some of you may be wondering, well, where's political literacy relate to education, clearly? And I would argue from my experience at CSE and some other information we have to get into, an understanding of politics, with a true understanding of politics, you begin to see that politics affects everybody. There's not a single person who's not affected in some way by politics. So with an appreciation for politics, you have naturally an appreciation for learning more, learning how to alleviate the conditions for others, learning how to improve your own life. But anyways, so going into CSE prior, Mr. Henchen, I was always interested in politics. I had a passion for it. However, I was caught up in ideas. I didn't know, like as a youth, what could I possibly do? Now, my passion in politics mixed with the political literacy that I was exposed to in CSE, it provided me with more, by making me more politically literate, it provided me more opportunities. Recently, I'm currently working out the details for an internship at Vermont State House, where I plan to be working on the Economic Commission under a senator. And that would never happen without my heightened awareness of politics around me, understanding that as a youth, it does affect me, and I should care. Also, beginning next month, I'm hoping to begin working with a local planning commission on one of the towns, and what they're looking to do, incorporating me, is providing youth perspective on how do we create a better community, both physically, but also economically. And then also on top of that, I'll also be looking to work with the Central Vermont Regional Planning Commission, which is all the towns of Central Vermont. So with those amazing opportunities, I was really motivated to study more outside of school, become more interested in not only politics, but education as a whole. So I began a independent study. And this independent study, I get credit for it through school. It's personalized learning plan, multiple pathways. And Mr. Henchen has been my supervisor for this. And this independent study has led me to explore how can I, as an individual, a 17-year-old, become involved in local politics? How can I make an effective difference? In addition to that, I forgot to mention, perhaps I should have mentioned first, was I'm also a member of a dual enrollment course called Communicating School Redesign. And what we're looking at is how can we effectively use youth partnership and adult partnership to communicate a new piece of legislation in Vermont called Act 77, which is really looking to incorporate personalized learning plans, proficiency-based learning. And so Harwood is unique in the sense that we're the first school, as we know right now in Vermont, of coordinating a school-wide dialogue, talking about what does it mean, what's good education in the classroom, what does it mean to be engaged, how can we implement proficiency-based learning so that it helps everybody. And so really, political literacy for me opened my mind and really appreciating education as a whole. That's kind of my personal story.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. So the other strategy, and the other two speakers are going to speak, and this is, this is actually an email, that I got from a student, and she echoed the same things. It wasn't until after graduation I realized you're teaching not only encouraging to stay in school, but to be a better thinker. If I hadn't learned to have more patience for viewpoints of others, I hate to think who I would be today. And there's a little joke there too, and I'm not trying to be a liberal brainwasher necessarily, but she says they have become the very liberal opinions, which shocked me because she was actually very conservative in class, so I guess we can talk about that during the Q&A. But the other idea is this. The other strategy we use is that's kind of the standards-based stuff. We have those standards. We have the content standards as well. We look at education. We look at education, how to create a strong learning community. We look at political literacy, media literacy, and then we look at, since it's a sustainability course, we look at the 3 spheres of sustainability: environmental issues, social issues, and economic issues. That's all the standard stuff. That's the stuff everybody gets, and they're expected to sort of grow. But then there's the other piece about, well, how do you create personalization? So the community action projects is a chance for them to put their knowledge into action. because that's often the missing piece. And I think, Cole was, like you said, he was stuck in the world of ideas. And many students might have a lot of opinions, but they don't really know how to act. And I think actually once you start seeing all the different community action projects and students start seeing all the different ways you can actually act, that argument that we can't do anything, we can't make a difference, just falls away. It's really shocking. So the community action projects basically ask students to take their knowledge that they've learned to do good in society, to do good, to lead to a positive change in the community. They're asked to integrate, to work with a community partner. So there's a bit of a service learning component to work with and learn from a community partner in some way. And we're structuring that. On the table is a performance log. In the past, I've struggled like most teachers with making sure that we're using class time productively. This year it's actually gone much better. I don't know, we have one current student and the other 4 from last year. And there was a lot of slack time last year. These things they were not perfect. And my classroom is far from perfect. But we're developing strategies together with students. So at the end of each year, we talk to students and we actually talk about the task. And sometimes it's annoying. Sometimes we spend more time talking about the task and we feel like we spent 3 months on climate change when really we spent a month on what is an argument analysis. And that sheet I gave you, that simple Google Doc, that might seem like, oh yeah, that's pretty basic. That took probably 4 different iterations of tasks to get to that very simple thing with those very simple learning targets that actually works. So personalized community action projects. So we're going to have a couple students just talk about their projects and then also other things that they learned in CSC. So take your time. So Omar?
So one thing I think is very important when it comes to education is application. And for the majority of my high school career, I was learning things that had no real life application, at least not for me. CSC changed that for me a lot. And not only has it taught me life skills like we've been talking about, I use them nearly every day, but it also promotes outside learning activities. Last year, Mr. Henchen brought me and 3 other students to a rally at our state house. The goal of the rally was to get politicians to divest from offshore oil companies and invest in local businesses. This rally, as well as the CSC class itself, made me realize that although I am a young high school student, I still have a lot of power. Power over the things that happen in my community, but also power over my life. I've always struggled with the traditional school learning environment, and I never really did anything to change it because I never thought it was realistic. But this year, I had the confidence and the courage to take charge and kind of form my school day the way that I wanted. And thanks to multiple pathways and my counselors, I'm actually taking part in an internship at my local glassblowing shop, and I have taken courses at the community college in Vermont, and I can safely say that I enjoy getting up in the morning and going to school, and I never thought I'd be able to say that. So.
And getting straight A's this year.
Straight A's. Never had that before.
So another project idea, so that was testimony at divestment. It never made its way out of committee. Students said, what do we do next? We had 30 students there overall, which was awesome, and it didn't work. Essentially, to their perspective, it failed. And we talked about that, and we came up with another plan. So this is Haley this year. This is a video to testimony that's actually. So this is the plan, and this is Haley's project this year.
So my project this year was the youth lobby, and it was inspired by the idea of lowering the voting age to 16, which is something that I strongly believe should happen. And with this idea, I realized that I, as a young American, don't have a say in what goes on in my world. And at first I was upset, and I didn't know what to do at all. But after some discussions, I realized that I could have a say, even though I wasn't entitled to a vote. I could lobby politicians and get them to hear my voice. But at first, I had some doubts. I asked myself, why did they listen to one person, one kid at that? And I knew that was a really pessimistic way of thinking. So then I thought, if we have more people to back up our arguments, then maybe they will listen. With the divestment thing, they only had 30 students, but if there were 2,000 students there, I'm sure it would have gotten a lot further. And I want a voice, and I want the youth of America to have a voice, and I realize that the youth lobby can do this. And so when I was given the opportunity to design a project, I decided to design a project for something that I believed in.
Yeah. So this is an invitation too, right?
Yes.
So actually at youthlobby.org, we want to create a youth lobbying organization for New England schools for sure. And on the website there's, join us, and the website's loading a little slow, but there's a little form here, and we'd like to get students to create a youth lobby group in their local high school so that, they have a cadre of students that they can call up at a moment's notice when there's an issue and that really matters to youth. And like Haley said, have 200 people, 2,000 people show up. I'd love to see us skip school for the climate day personally, but and I think that would get a lot of students there. Maybe not for the right reasons, so maybe we need to rethink that strategy. But these are some options. So for real, for students in the room, there's a form that we can start building this, both in Vermont and regionally. There's a really kind of creepy but powerful photo that comes up when the internet's working. Let's see if we can get it. Nope. Let's see it. Yeah, it's on there, yeah. We debated whether or not that was a good photo or not. So, all right, so next steps, reflection, and scalability. Scalability was kind of a dumb moment for all of us. Of course it's scalable. That's the point. We've designed this whole thing to be scalable. In fact, I introduced students, within the first week of class, we talk about that there's going to be a community action project. And I tell kids that my community action project is to create, eventually, the best civics class in the known universe, which is a very high goal, and we are very far away from it. But to create the best civics class in the known universe, and then to spread that, and to communicate that, to really share that with other schools. Because you can imagine what our country would look like if every school, taught this sort of stuff, and every student left high school being politically engaged, or at least more politically engaged than they were when they got there. Now, to be honest with you, these guys are all here, and it was not because of CSC, and they've said about CSC, and I think it promoted it a little bit. It definitely kept them going in the right direction. But all of these guys were, they had some sort of activism, and depending on what happened in their lives. I know Cole had another teacher who had an impact, and a brother who's politically active. It's very difficult to create people that are politically active. It's not like one. What I really realized this year is that it's, even if every school had 1 year, it still wouldn't be enough. I also realized that as we shift towards PBL, the whole idea of a 10th grade civics course might not exist because, we're getting rid of sort of moving along at grade scale. So what I would argue is talk to your students, ask them why they're disengaged. Ask those questions, figure it out, find out what are the ingredients. Ask kids who are engaged and say, why? What happened to you? It's a good thing, but what happened to you? What experiences did you have in your life that allowed you to become more engaged? And then try to recreate those in your schools from kindergarten through 12th grade. Have kids doing deliberative dialogue. Why couldn't a 5-year-old say, should kids be allowed to vote? I bet that'd be a pretty amazing conversation. And then have it again in 1st grade, 2nd grade, 3rd grade. And really engage kids. So we're going to continue revising and improving the course along with student input, increase communication and collaboration, do things like this to try to sort of spread the message. Using social media, that's my blog. It's called New School Civics. It used to be called New School History, and even though all my students agreed that has a much better ring, I really had to take history off the pedestal because history is, again, it's a means to an end, not an end unto itself. So New School Civics, and it's just kind of doing it in a new way. So we're going to be using that to continue to push, to integrate the community. Maybe try to get some data. It'd be nice that, to look at other schools who may not have a civics course and look at levels of political engagement to really see with more hard quantitative data, is it really having an impact? And then lobby local and state governments to make civics a mandatory course in the 10th grade. Now this is kind of what I'm changing my mind on. And maybe we don't mandate that. Maybe it's just strongly encouraging schools to do something about it. Ronald Dworkin, I've got some great articles and some thought-provoking material on my website. But one of his quotes from an article where he wrote 3 questions for America, which is really thought-provoking article. He talks about how we need to be teaching what he calls contemporary politics in American schools. And he says we cheat our children inexcusably if education is so remote from political issues that we allow our nation to continue only to masquerade as democratic. And I just thought that was really powerful. So there's that little dude again, and he's begging you guys, please help me gain the confidence required, the knowledge, skills, and dispositions so that I can make a difference in the world. Really political literacy in our schools now. So, actually a little bit early. So we're going to shift to Q&A, and I would hope there's some questions. Yeah, so we have about 20 minutes for question and answer.
Thank you for the presentation. I enjoyed it, and I'm a science teacher. But I'm curious to know, because I want to take back some information on performance standards, or whatever you want to call it. So how do you arrive at a grade for the students, and what does it look like?
Well, one of the big points that we had is that, like I said earlier, me and Mr. Henchen didn't really agree, but we still get along and stuff. And it's because my grade, I got an A in the class, and a lot of kids I guess didn't, but
Well, part of dialogue is contributing your thoughts. And many kids, who are used to being more passive, did not. So I mean that, if you're wondering why you got an A.
Yeah, it's mainly about your participation and being eager to learn. And there was assignments that we had to do, and it didn't matter what your view was on it, just that if you did it and if you had an opinion, and not even if you had an opinion, but if you had an educated opinion, because we had to learn the difference between that last year. I found that I would get so worked up about the things we talked about in class that I'd go home, I'd research my side, I'd research the other side, and I'd come back and be like, oh, I know what you're about to say, and I know this part, So that's part of the skills that we got. But I think that as long as you do the work, no matter what side you come from, at least with Mr. Henchen, you have the ability, no matter what your opinion, to get a good grade.
But Mallory was also talking about, she's very concerned about scalability, about spreading this to other schools, because it could very easily be, if we talk about the difference between brainwashing and education, and really, it often can be the same thing. I mean, it's, as a science teacher, are you brainwashing our kids to think of, that evolution is a real thing? There's, everything we teach is political. So it's, to try to ignore that is ridiculous, but we're right. So that's part of what we're trying to do, is develop tasks, valid tasks that are valid and reliable, that are not based on a student's particular point of view. So, for example, this year, and I haven't always, I think I've always definitely graded fairly based on do they have an educated opinion, but it might not have been as evident to these guys. I think this year, the argument analysis, for one, is very cut and dry. You either identified the author's arguments or you didn't. So for climate change, we read an article by we read an article by Bill McKibben, who some of you guys may be aware of, 350.org, and lays out the whole the whole problem with climate change. He believes climate change is an issue. We need to address it now, immediately. We broke that down. Half the class broke that article down. The other half of the class read this article from Alex Epstein called "The Moral Case for Fossil Fuels," and he basically argues that fossil fuels are a moral good, a positive good. To me, well, I'm not going to get into that, but he argues, and what I did is I tried to find the strongest argument against climate change I could. And for me, the argument that climate change isn't happening, it's just, there's too much science. That climate change is not being caused by humans, that's not really a strong argument. But the argument Epstein made was very good. He's saying, listen, we rely on these fossil fuels. Fossil fuels provide us with everything that we have. And these environmentalists want us to just stop tomorrow. And so they analyze both of those arguments, and then they both have to evaluate them. So whether you evaluate the argument and find whether or not the things are true or not is based on research and evidence. When it comes time for them to synthesize and form their own educated opinion, it's not graded on are they right or wrong. That's impossible. It's graded on do they have evidence to back up their ideas. And can that get subjective? Sure. I don't know of any parent that's ever complained about me teaching and bias. Maybe Amy knows. She got some emails and never, you know. So, and I was very worried about that, and I am very worried about that, especially if we're going to promote it somewhere else. So this whole thing is like rife with landmines. I mean, there's a lot of bad ways to do this, for sure. And that's what I said. Like, I could not do this work without PBL. You know, I mean, PBL provides the clarity over what is the skill and that sort of stuff that you know, that is just super important. Yeah, Emma.
Also, so a concern that we have been talking about is teachers teaching political literacy and how in politics you have an opinion. It's impossible not to teach it biased. And with Mr. Henchen, he was very straightforward and he would give us his opinion, but he would always give us the why. And so there's concerns for if you're teaching your agenda, but we learned before we talked about anything political, we learned how you form an argument, why you agree with things, what you need to have a strong argument. And so Mr. Henchen, we didn't always agree on everything, and if he disagreed with something, there's the concern that you just want to agree with what the teacher says so you can get the grade, so you don't have to speak up. But I think one of the beauties of CSC is it's a really strong community, and in class it's a really great environment to put yourself out there. And so with Mallory said about like grading and how scary it is when you're teaching politics to children, being very concerned about not brainwashing them, but
I'm not grading opinion.
Yeah, you're not grading opinion, and I think Mr. Henchen's way of just being very open about with what his beliefs are and the why. And whenever we had a belief, we always had to have a why. And that why couldn't just be from one side, it had to be a wide range. We looked at both sides, we analyzed it, and we learned the techniques on how to break each thing down. And my God, the techniques we learned in that class, I applied to all of my classes. And it leads to stronger argument, more critical thinking, and more open minds. And
it's helped you with essays for junior year.
And I mean, that's why I think we're all here, because we believe that all schools need to be teaching the class.
Yeah, they're not part of the class, which is great. You know, I think of these guys, you know, what do I wear? You know, what do I wear to the conference? And we talk about the strength of mental models when you're trying to set targets, learning targets. And like, I heard people talking at the dinner table, well, I'm going to dress like cash formal, like blah, blah, blah. People are like, yeah, they were like confused. Well, I'm wearing a white shirt with a blah, blah, blah. And then they're like, oh, okay, you're wearing that, so I'll wear this, right? It's a mental model. I do believe that that anybody that teaches this needs to be, I guess, sort of a radical centrist, but they need to be passionate. And I think that one of the ingredients of what makes somebody politically engaged is knowing